Hello there again. Well, Bess, so nice to have you here again.
Hi,
Um,
Angie. Thank you. Good to see you.
I just wanted to pick up where we left off the last conversation.
Yes.
And there was one thing I wanted to ask you before we dive into the deep culture topic again, and that's how are you and your business dealing with the pandemic?
Well, the pandemic has been a time of uncertainty for everyone around the globe, and it's impacted people in various ways.
Hmm.
As far as our business, we have shifted completely, as everyone shifted, to working virtually. So our training delivery is now completely virtual. The other thing that we've noticed about our clients is that people are meeting in a video and audio capacity with one another like they've never done in the past. In the past, if you had an international meeting, it would be only audio. You would
Okay.
not see the person.
Yeah.
And that happened for years. But I think with the shift um, and how we've become so um, used to really focused on meeting people in on video, that it's okay to have videos with our international counterparts, even during different hours,
Yeah.
and to actually meet some of our clients and colleagues um, kind of through video has been different. So it's actually been a positive, I think, impact COVID
Uh-huh.
has
Uh-huh.
had on our meeting and developing those relationships, because I think seeing the people face to face, even through video, is important. And
Yeah.
I'm just so thrilled because I believe things are getting better.
Uh-huh.
I'm planning international business travel at the moment, so I cannot wait
Oh,
to uh,
fantastic.
to see people face to face.
Fantastic. And let me know when you come to Zurich so that I can welcome you here.
I will, absolutely. Yes,
We really need to meet in person.
definitely. I
Yeah,
agree.
it's
Yes,
fantastic. So I wanted to dive in with the nerd question of the day.
yes,
Basically, we've been looking at cultural dimensions. We talked about models already last time. But one of the things that I always find fascinating is when we look at like the classics, basically. So if you think of Edward T. Hall and that he divides culture by time, space, and relationships.
mhm.
Do you think these dimensions are deeply different from for people from the US, for example, in comparison to other cultures?
I think so. I think Americans are, and other cultures are different, and it's
Hmm.
important to look at the individual as well as the organization, because you cannot stereotype.
Hmm.
We need to make these generalizations so they don't apply to every American.
Hmm.
So that's an important thing to focus on. But it is nice to have data and a framework to describe some generalizations that we see within a particular culture. The US does tend to be fixed as far as time, how they look at time in comparison to many other countries around the world. Time is money, that's in the business sense. And also the relationship, we have a dimension, it's called doing or being.
Hmm.
And it's very much the US is kind of this doing, which is task oriented, very much focused on the task. Probably before the relationship, a relationship is built through the completion of a task. Whereas in other cultures, the relationship needs to develop first and build that trust in order then to flow and get the work done. So it's very interesting to see that in the US, this doing and the fixed time is very important. And then space is the other dimension as well. And that's an interesting one because that describes either public or personal
Hmm.
space, either
Hmm.
physical or whether you share information with others, whether that be, business information, personal information. And again, that it does vary according to the country and culture you're comparing the US to, because the US can be more private than, I would say, some Latin or Asian cultures. However, they can be more public than some of the European countries that we're comparing them to. So Americans can be both public and private, and you have to look at it in that perspective.
So when we look at this task orientation, for example, the time focus, the let's say more private aspect of being American, I think there's probably some very close relationship to the Germans. And interestingly, we notice always there's a slight difference between, let's say, Germans in Germany and Swiss Germans. So I find it really interesting that you're saying, that there's the task builds the trust. So working together over time builds the trust, because I think that's very similar here. Yeah. In terms of your experience with applying this in your individual cultural blueprint indicator, what we call ICBI, how do you think this model reflects some of those differences? For example, when we look at US Americans versus European cultures.
Well, the model does incorporate the time dimension, which we have fixed and fluid, and the space dimension, which is public and private, and then also relationship, which is, that I mentioned, it's doing or being. And it compares many different cultures, over 40 different, we define them by country, but I think it's also important to consider organizational culture, functional culture, and also an individual's background as to their influences and what, have they worked in multinational companies, have they had an international educational background, and what countries or cultures, or maybe it's not a national culture, do they really identify with more? And I think that's important, and maybe there isn't one. They've had a lot of international experiences. They're very flexible, but everyone has preferences.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. That's what the ICBI will do on those dimensions of time, relationship, and space, and a few others, so that people will just see, oh, okay, this is my preference, but I can change my style, or how I communicate, how I interact with others, so I'm more effective in my work, my relationships, and just building trust and building respect with each other.
Yeah, you just mentioned something really, I think, really important for the people listening to this video. So I sometimes draw like 3 circles. Yeah, like back in kindergarten when we learned the like the little basics of mathematics and algebra. And in those 3 circles, we have, for example, the corporate culture, the country culture, but also, for example, the culture of a profession. Yeah, for example, accountants have a certain professional culture. Yeah. So maybe an accountant from the US and an accountant from Switzerland, they get along really well because they have that in common.
Yes, that's right.
And in in our intercultural world, we have a term for that. It's called intersectionality. Nobody has to learn that term because it's really complicated. But I guess the interesting thing, or the important thing to remember when we look at those dimensions and the way you use them in the ICBI, is that we're here talking about the individual preference. Yeah, so even if you are German where, you know, your national culture might indicate, for example, that you have a tendency to be more task focused. It could be that your personal preference is different, that you're more relationship focused
Mhm.
because of maybe your history or your development. Yeah.
Right.
So, and I think that's why I love what you're doing, because, you know, one of the criticisms we often hear about the cultural dimensions is that they're so stagnant,
Mhm.
and that they
Mhm.
put people in boxes and in
Right.
stereotypes, and that
Right.
it is, there's a danger, you know, that when we look at those cultural dimensions, that from that data that was obviously collected like 50 years ago, that we would think everybody has to be that way just because of their
Absolutely.
passport, for example.
That's right, exactly. And that's not how we use it. And that's important that there's a trainer or a
Mm,
coach that explains that. And I think that's the challenge, is that people just look at it without
mhm,
an explanation of how to debrief it.
mhm,
And and I think now it's so important to take a look at a multinational team and
mhm,
how people score.
mhm,
Not focus so much on the national culture, but let's see how we were different, and how we can, and bridge some of those gaps, or really use those strengths that people have. Maybe some are more relationship focused and can get things done by building a team and relationships, and that will actually create um, speed in getting a task completed
mhm, mhm,
versus just being very task focused at the beginning. So again, I think it's important to also mention that relationship, more being cultures can get the task done too, and even more efficiently than the
mhm,
task
mhm,
focused culture. So I
mhm.
think, again, you have to look at the positives of both, and it's not a judgment of one or the other. It's just a different way of a different process of living and working.
Yeah, and you know, it's not always that easy, especially as a leader. We sometimes, you know, we sometimes fall into the trap of blaming stereotypical thinking, behavior to cultural background. Yeah, but it
Right.
could sometimes also be personality or personal preference or work style. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
and this is something I sometimes notice with myself, and then I feel bad
Yes.
that I just applied a stereotype to someone
Oh,
without really looking at the full context of what is going on. Yeah,
that's right. That's very important, is to check for understanding, right? You
yeah,
have, there are clues, right, that we have, and then it's a hypothesis to test. I always want to reinforce that, and not, to make judgments very quickly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, but know who you are first. I think that's the most important thing, is self-awareness. First, I understand myself and my preferences,
Mm,
and then why there's an emotional reaction, perhaps
yeah,
working
yeah,
with a different culture. And I
yeah,
think that's the starting point.
yeah, yeah. And that's really could really go very deep and have maybe a lot more to do with your childhood than anything cultural. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right. That's
yeah,
right. They
yeah,
do say that by the age of 12, how you were raised, where you were raised, some of the values there are fairly strong.
yeah.
So I
Uh,
wouldn't say complete at that age, but some of the basics on cultural
Very,
and
very
values.
good. Very good. Thanks a lot. Well, can you talk a bit about um, communication and
Mhm.
style differences, especially when we think about high context and low context communication styles? So, if for a quick roundup, you know, of the differences between German speaking German speaking people and American people, if we can say that, maybe North American people.
Right.
I would really appreciate if you could also understand a bit more about communication styles, and also if you could talk about politeness and
Mhm.
how it's perceived differently.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we have high context, which is much more around being aware of others, of relationships, of many things, and we're a bit more careful about how we say things. Okay, and especially in a conflict situation, if there's a problem, oh, maybe how should I approach this? Maybe I should get someone else involved. Very careful, and careful around hierarchy too in business. Lower context is more direct. It's more explicit communication, and especially even if there's a challenge or a conflict, let's just put it out on the table, and let's just resolve this and move on. Okay, so that would be very direct or a low context where you're not looking at the other things that are happening. And it's a different style, and it works very effective in different cultures. One isn't the right way or the wrong way. It's just what is common and acceptable. And so I love using images, and I wish I had a hamburger here to show you. But when I coach Americans and German region speaking, I use this. And so this is in a conflict or feedback situation where you need to deliver negative, some constructive criticism or just negative, or something that's a bit challenging. Okay. Well, Americans, and I think it has to do with perhaps maybe even labor laws and just kind of understanding, legality of what you can, how you approach someone. But the manager or someone giving a feedback, like performance review, would start out with a positive, like the bun for the hamburger. And then, talk about, well, you've done very well, you're always on time and delivering the results. However, and then here's the meat part. It seems like your relationship with your other team members is suffering. I've heard, a few things about that, and then blah, blah, blah. And then finally wrapping it up at the end with the bun at the bottom of the hamburger with another positive remark, right? Which is, I think, you're doing well. I'm sure you'll be able to, remedy this. And, you've been with the company for many years. So I think that this is, this is a positive relationship that we have. And so anyway, so it's all about kind of this packaging of being aware. So it's a little more higher context. And when I coach Germans, they basically just go to the meat part.
I think I know what's coming. So when I talk about feedback styles, I have 3 different ones. So it's the feedback, the burger, or we call it sometimes a sandwich, which is the US method.
Right.
And then there's the Hindi style, which is positive only. Yeah. I loved that when I was in India. So you only get positive feedback, but if something hasn't been said, there's probably something to look into.
Right.
And then there's the German style, and we call that in German it's called Kritik. Yeah, so critique. And critique is really helpful when you want to write a novel.
Okay.
Or, when you look at a piece of work and you can separate the piece of work from the person, then critique is really good. It's used in writing, for example. Yeah. But it's not a good feedback technique.
No.
It regularly destroys the self-confidence, even of the toughest German person.
Okay. Very good. Well, and I look at how children are raised, and I think that has a lot to do with it, whether or not there's positive feedback or more of a combination of the two, and how much, and what's the expectation. So, and I actually think Americans need more positive feedback based on how they were raised than some other countries that we compared her to. So,
But I
anyways,
would say, like, even, like looking at this as a German, I think in German companies, it would help a lot of people if they got more positive feedback. It is not inherent in the culture. However, I think it would really help if managers learned to give more positive feedback and also learned not to just focus on the negative.
Okay.
Just to help people with the self-confidence in general.
Right, good.
Yeah. No. So, what about politeness?
Oh, yes, politeness. And that really goes into formal and informal. When I think about that, that's one of the dimensions on the ICBI as well. And, how much formality, protocol, customs, ways of interacting is important. And I'm based in California, and we are one of the most, I say we just because I'm here now, I've lived everywhere, but the most informal business culture that I've experienced. There might be a few more, but in comparison to Europe and especially the German-speaking regions, the U.S. tends to be more informal as their presentation. And most people think about dress, how people are dressed. Yes, that's an obvious one. And people will come to meetings, very casual in California, even in the summer, sometimes in shorts or, people are just like, but there are a lot of small startups, and that's kind of the, not in every industry, obviously finance is suits and, things. So we can't stereotype, but in general, the way people speak, and I think we talked about this last time, is even by language, there's the formality and the informality of the word you and many other types of ways to indicate respect for someone you don't know very well. And in the US, people try to put people at ease by speaking very casually to them because they think that will make them feel more comfortable. Like I know, we almost like we've known each other, but we haven't. And so that's a clash with more formal cultures that kind of expect, a little bit more formality. And it goes back to sharing information about space, right? Public and private. I think this also you can bring into this formality, because being more informal, Americans tend to share more, I guess, public information, or maybe a bit more private, where formal cultures would be shocked, like, talking on an airplane about, their health or some things that you would not tell a stranger. But yeah, even from a business perspective, I think Americans would be open to sharing more information. And
I think that's sometimes not well understood by German speakers. So then they think, oh, we already went to the friendship level, because for us it's like, different levels. So, then they think, okay, if the guy says to me, my business partner tells me, oh, come to my house, we're gonna have a barbecue, they think it's serious. And that's why here often, what I hear a lot about Americans is they're so superficial. They invite you to their home, but then when you show up,
that's right,
they don't even remember who you are.
That's right. Yes. So it's a different way, and entertaining is different in the cultures, because and I believe that's true of many others. And I coach Americans when they move abroad. If you're invited to someone's home, that's a big deal. It's important. They are extending friendship, a deeper friendship outside of work. Whereas I believe Americans tend to, invite people, and it's not quite as deep, the expectation of a friendship. It goes back to, I think in the first video, we talked about the coconut and the peach, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
So,
I can just tell you, from friendships I've had with Americans, that it sometimes surprises me, how many friends can somebody have? Because for me, the definition of a friend is a different one. Like
Yes,
even, the word friend it's a very close relationship.
yes,
So I would probably say I have maybe 10 to 20 friends. Yeah.
right,
But I
right.
have like 500 acquaintances.
Yes,
And
exactly.
so for me, it's like I know a lot of people and I'm happy to have dinner with them. I love them. I like to hang out with them, but I would not say they're my friends.
Right.
And for Americans is often like they have all these friends that we would
Yeah.
probably consider acquaintances. Yeah. So also we differentiate and segregate the relationship by the way we talk about the relationship. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like a
Mm-hmm.
work colleague is something else than a friend. Like we
Right.
wouldn't say a work colleague is a friend,
Yes. Yes.
even though we see them every day more than our partners. Yeah.
Yes, right, right. And I think there's language, but there's how you interpret relationships
Yeah.
with people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because with working virtually and now we're moving into a hybrid work environment, there is a new term. It's called boundary theory, and it's
Hmm.
basically segmentation versus
Yeah.
integration. And segmentation is I separate my work life from my home life, and integration is I integrate the two.
Yeah.
And I think with this style of working that we're in, I think there's a preference, right? What people prefer. But
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
see the trend is into more integration, where it has to happen, where people at your work understand a little bit more about your personal life, so you can run in a way or work in a way, run it's to balance your personal and professional life. And I think that's important, and that's another cultural difference I see as
Really,
well, is
really
the
big
expectation.
point. Absolutely. I've
Yeah.
been working in global mobility for a long time. And it was something where other HR professionals, they were always surprised, like how deep and how informed I am of the personal situation of our expats, because obviously that was really relevant for supporting them and helping them through the transition process.
Yes, yes.
But it's
And
very
hybrid
different way
working,
of working, and it's
that's right.
very not typical, for HR people to know so much about the personal
Yes,
life of employees.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think moving into a hybrid environment when you're in the office and working remotely, and I see that becoming a way of working, I
Mhm.
think leaders need to understand their team and if possible, what the challenges are of working in that way, because it's taking a toll on people. We've been conducting hybrid training now, and it's a challenge to
Yeah.
balance
Yeah,
your
absolutely. Yeah.
schedule,
I
right?
see that as well, a lot. Well, before we wrap up, what are your 5 most important tips for people when they feel a bit overwhelmed with cultural differences?
Okay, I know. Uh, do I have to give exactly five?
You can also give
That's
us
a cultural
6.
difference. I could give six or three.
Yeah.
That's the other difference is flexibility and order,
Yeah,
right?
you can also
Uh,
give us 6.
that's that's one that we missed is order, exactly, or
Yeah.
flexibility. And Americans tend to be more flexible. So I'll give you a few closing thoughts on that. I think it's important, again, if you're overwhelmed with cultural differences, to really focus on what triggers that. And if you think it's a cultural difference, you're working across borders, first stop and
Mhm.
get find a coach or a mentor or a buddy and someone who has some international or cultural experience, and talk through what's happening, what are your values. And if you have the opportunity to work with a coach one-on-one, I'd highly recommend it. And you can really pinpoint, what are my values, and whether they're influenced by a culture or internal values, and which ones are not being honored. And from that point, you can decide what is negotiable right? That you can change to work more effectively across cultures or with others. And what's non-negotiable? What are some of those values that are really, really core and they're not being met and you need to make changes, or you need to find ways to work effectively with another country or culture or person or group? And if you're on a multinational team, how do we negotiate cultural alliances? And obviously a facilitator is great for that when it's across cultures and many people are working together. So I would highly recommend it. And
Good idea.
create those bridges. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was 5, 3, 6, but that's how I would wrap up the tip.
I love the image of the bridge. That's a very good idea.
Yes, the
Yeah,
bridge.
very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Val, for your time. It's been a
you,
pleasure
Angie.
talking to you again.
Same here.
And
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you again when you come to Zurich, Switzerland.
I will let you know. I'm so excited, yes, to travel.
Fantastic.
And
Thank you.
come to the US and California too.
Yeah,
It'll
I
be great
will.
to see
I
you as
will.
well. Okay,
As soon as this pandemic is over.
that's right. Absolutely. Hopefully
Thanks a lot.
soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.